Welcome to the next episode of Small Business Legal Tips. So, you're an IT pro looking to start a corporation in Massachusetts for your IT consulting business. You can handle anything from cloud migration to network security, but you're not sure how to set up a corporation properly so that it shields your personal assets from your personal debts and liabilities. And who can blame you? You've got the tech and business skills needed to start an IT business, but you're not an attorney, and the legal paperwork, the state filings, and the ongoing compliance requirements can feel a little overwhelming. I'm attorney Mark Bross of Bross Law LLC. I'm a practicing small business attorney, and I've helped countless entrepreneurs and IT consultants start corporations in Massachusetts. In this video, I'll give you a detailed roadmap about how to start your IT consulting corporation in Massachusetts. I'll go step by step through the whole process, from naming your company to appointing officers and directors and filing all the right documents and creating the right records. I'll also talk about your ongoing compliance requirements, and by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what paperwork you need to file and what records you need to keep in order to operate your corporation properly and maximize the protection of your personal assets. And please, if you'd like to get more helpful tips from me, please hit the like and subscribe button below. So let's get to it. Step 1. Choosing a name for your corporation. The first step you want to take is you want to choose a name for your IT consulting corporation. A lot of people stress out about this because they worry about the branding aspect of their business, and they want to choose the perfect name for their corporation. Branding, of course, is important, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but there are really only a couple legal requirements that need to be met when it comes to naming your corporation. The first legal requirement is that your corporation name has to contain a corporation designated word in the name, like corporation, incorporated, company, limited, or any kind of abbreviation of those words like Corp, Inc., and so on and so forth. So a name like Massachusetts IT Solutions Inc. would work, or a name like Cybernetic Systems Corp. would also work. The second legal requirement is that your corporation name can't be the same or similar to any other business entity that's already registered with the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts without the express written consent of that business entity. This includes entities such as limited liability companies, also known as LLCs, limited partnerships, business trusts, or any foreign company or other entity that's registered to do business in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts Division of Corporations has a free online search tool where you can search the name of any business entity that you're considering to see whether the name is already taken. I'll put a link below to the website. You should absolutely check out any name you're considering before choosing your IT consulting corporation name. For example, if you wanted to name your business IT Consulting Agency Inc., you wouldn't be able to because that entity is already registered in Massachusetts. If the name you're thinking about meets both of these requirements, then you're free to choose it for your IT consulting business. And if you're not quite ready to start the corporation yet, you can reserve the name for 60 days with the Secretary of the Commonwealth by filing an application of reservation of name and paying a $30 fee. I'll put in a link below to the website where you can obtain the form. By filing this application, you can prevent anybody else from using the name in Massachusetts within the 60-day period. And this can be extended for another 60 days by paying an additional $30 fee. Now, as I mentioned, many people stress out about choosing the right corporation name because they're worried about branding. And branding is absolutely important. For any brand name you're thinking about using, you want to make sure that the brand name is available by checking to see whether the domain name is already taken, especially the .com. You should also Google the name, check social media accounts, and possibly run a full-fledged trademark search with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, which is called the USPTO. You want to make sure that no one else is already using the name and that you're not infringing somebody else's intellectual property. But the brand name is completely different from the corporation name, and you can have a very bland corporation name that has nothing to do with your brand. For example, if your name is William Smith, you could name your corporation Will Smith Corp., and that would be perfectly fine and legal in Massachusetts. However, once you have your brand name picked out, you would also need to file a business certificate, which is called the DBA certificate, with the town where the corporation is located to indicate that the corporation is doing business under that brand name. For example, if the Will Smith Corp. Wants to do business under the name Sunset IT Consulting, it would need to file a business certificate in the town where it's located to indicate that it was doing business under that particular name. I'll put a link to a website below that discusses business certificates in Massachusetts and how to obtain one. Step 2. Appoint a registered agent and choose a registered office. After you've chosen the corporation's name, the next step is to appoint the corporation's registered agent and choose its registered office. The corporation's registered agent is a person who is authorized to accept a summons and complaint or any other official government legal notice on behalf of the corporation. The sole requirement to be a registered agent in Massachusetts is that the person has a physical address in Massachusetts, which is called its registered office. Now, there are two important things to note about the registered agent and the registered office. The first is that the address for the registered office actually has to be a real physical address in Massachusetts. It can't be a P.O. box, but it can be the principal address of the business so long as it's a real business in Massachusetts. The second thing to note is that the name of the registered agent and the address of the registered office will be public records because they are included in the articles of organization. So if you choose to be the registered agent for your corporation and the registered office is your home, these will both be a public record that's searchable by anyone. For privacy reasons, many founders are uncomfortable with this publicity, and so they choose to hire some third party, such as their attorney, as registered agent for the corporation. I do this on behalf of many of my clients for a nominal annual fee. Step 3. Identify and appoint initial officers and directors of the corporation. The next step you want to take in setting up your IT consulting corporation is to identify and appoint the initial officers and directors of the corporation. In Massachusetts, every corporation must have 3 required officers: a president, a secretary, and a treasurer. The president is the chief executive officer of the corporation and is also responsible for presiding over all meetings of the shareholders and the board of directors if there's no chairperson of the board. The treasurer is the person who is responsible for the financial affairs of the corporation and for keeping accurate financial records. The secretary is the person responsible for preparing the minutes of the directors and shareholder meetings and for authenticating the records of the corporation. You can also have other officers if you want, but you have to have these 3 officers for your Massachusetts IT Consulting Corporation. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that although you have to have these 3 officers, they can all be the same person. So if you're forming your IT Consulting Corporation by yourself, you can hold all 3 offices and you don't need to find anybody else. But if you're married, you may want to consider having your spouse serve as one of these officers so that he or she can have some authority in your corporation and be publicly identified with the corporation. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that the identity of all 3 officers will be a public record, and you will need to provide a business address for each one. This could be the principal office of the corporation, but if it's your home, you again need to recognize that your home address will be publicly associated with the corporation and identified on the articles of organization. In addition to the officers of the corporation, you also need to identify all of the directors of the corporation, which are called the board of directors. The board of directors are the individuals who have all corporate power and authority, and they are responsible for directing the officers of the corporation and telling them what to do. The level of involvement of the board of directors will often depend on the size of the corporation. For smaller corporations, they are actively involved in the day-to-day operations because they are also often the officers of the corporation. But for larger corporations, they are usually not involved in the day-to-day operations, but are only responsible for major management policies and corporations' decisions, like deciding whether to merge with another company or other major corporate activities. Generally speaking, every Massachusetts corporation must have at least 1 director on the board of directors. However, if you have more than 1 shareholder, you must have at least 2 or 3 directors on your board, depending on the number of shareholders you have and what's stated in your articles of organization. We'll talk about this more in a minute. Like the officers, the identity and the address of your board of directors will be a public record. So make sure that everyone on your board is comfortable with being publicly identified in the articles of organization. Step 4. Complete and file the articles of organization. The next step to take in setting up your corporation is the big one. Complete and file your articles of organization. The articles of organization is the foundational charter document for your corporation, and it is an enforceable agreement between the corporation and its shareholders. You file it with the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and after it's filed, your corporation officially exists, although there are a few more steps that will need to be taken. There are 4 different ways you can file it: online, by fax, by mail, or in person. The filing fees vary depending on the way you file it and how many shares are being authorized in connection with the corporation. If you file online or by fax, the cost is $265 for up to 275,000 shares. And if you file it in person or by mail, the cost is $275 for up to 275,000 shares. If you want more shares, it will cost an additional $100 per 100,000 additional shares. Most people file online or by fax, depending on how much information you want to include with the articles of organization. If you file online, you can directly file at the Massachusetts Division of Corporations website. I'll provide the link below. But if you file in any other way, you want to use the downloadable form that's available at the Massachusetts Secretary of the Commonwealth website. I'll also put a link to that below. When you're completing the articles of organization, there are 8 different articles that need to be completed. The first 6 are permanent parts of the articles and can only be amended by filing articles of amendment, which will require a majority vote by the shareholders or directors, depending on what the bylaws of the corporation state. The articles of amendment will also require an additional filing fee. So in order to avoid a future hassle, you want to do your best to get the correct information for your first 6 articles for your articles of organization. The 7th and 8th articles are not permanent and can be changed without filing articles of amendment. Often the information in the 8th article is changed with the annual report that the corporation needs to file every year, and there are no other additional filing fees that are needed other than the filing fees associated with your annual report. Let's break down what should go into the articles of organization for your IT consulting business. In the first article, you're going to identify the exact name of the corporation, which you should already have from step 1. In the second article, you're typically going to leave this blank. By default, every corporation formed in Massachusetts is formed with the purpose of engaging in any lawful business. You'll only want to enter something in the second article if you want your IT consulting corporation to engage in some more limited purpose. I can't think of a reason why you'd want to do that, as it's generally better to keep your options open at this early stage. In the third article, you're going to identify the total number of shares that the corporation is authorized to issue, whether the shares have any par value, and whether there are multiple classes of shares. With respect to the number of shares, you should always authorize 275,000 shares, even if you are a single-person corporation. And the reason for this is that the base filing fee for the corporation allows you to authorize 275,000 shares. So you might as well take advantage of it. Your total number of authorized shares creates a bank of shares that the corporation can issue to outside investors or employees in the future. You never know when you might need to issue more shares in the future, so you might as well have them available in case you need them. With respect to par value, your corporation share should be issued without par value, as the concept of par value no longer has any meaning under the current Massachusetts corporation statute. It is an outdated concept that serves no purpose under Massachusetts law. This is completely different than Delaware corporate law, as the concept of par value plays a large role under Delaware law in determining the amount of franchise tax that can be owed by the corporation. Finally, if you want your corporation to have multiple classes of shares, you need to identify them here. An obvious question you might have is, what do I mean by multiple classes of shares? And that's a great question. When I'm talking about multiple classes of shares, I'm talking about shares that have different rights associated with them. For example, if you want to create one class of shares that has voting rights and another class of shares that doesn't, you would need to identify those 2 different classes here. Or if you want to create one class of shares that has higher or prioritized dividends or distributions, you also want to do that here. Each class would need to be given its own designation, like A, B, C, etc., and so on. You also need to provide information about each class in Article 4, which we'll talk about in a minute. Many small businesses, however, don't want to have multiple classes of shares, and so they don't need to put anything about the type of stock that is authorized. You can simply leave it blank or put CS for common stock. And if you plan on being an S corporation, you need to be very careful about having multiple classes of shares. Multiple classes are generally not permitted for an S corporation, although you can have a non-voting class of shares with an S corporation, so long as all shares receive distributions in the same way. In the fourth article, you're going to include a description of the different classes of shares that your corporation has and the rights associated with each class. So if you've identified 2 classes of shares in the third article, you would need to describe what each of these classes are in the fourth article and how they're different from each other. So, for example, if you decided to authorize 2 classes of shares, Class A and Class B, and Class A has voting rights and Class B does not, you would want to write something like, Class A and Class B are identical in all respects, except that Class A shares have voting rights and Class B shares do not. If your corporation only has one class of shares, this fourth article should be blank. In the fifth article, you want to identify and describe the restrictions, if any, on the sale or transfer of the IT corporation shares and state what those restrictions are. Now you might ask, why would I want to put restrictions on the shares of my IT corporation? And there are lots of different reasons why you might want to do so. But usually, the most important reason for smaller corporations is to make sure that the shareholders can't transfer the shares to any other person that the other shareholders don't want to be in business with. There are lots of different types of restrictions that can accomplish this, such as a right of first refusal, which requires a shareholder that wants to sell their shares to offer it first to the other shareholders or to the company. Another possibility is a requirement that any share transfer has to be approved in advance by a certain percentage of the board of directors or the other shareholders. But there really are a lot of different restrictions that you can impose that will impact a lot of different situations. So if you're thinking about imposing restrictions on the transfer of shares, I highly recommend that you speak with an attorney who can help with this. The sixth article is a generic open-ended article where you can add other lawful provisions that can change the default corporation rules in Massachusetts about how corporations are managed and governed. The Massachusetts Corporation Statute is a very flexible statute. It allows corporations to change a wide variety of the default rules governing corporations so long as those changes are included in the Articles of Organization the bylaws, or a written shareholder agreement. Some of the most common changes that are typically included in this sixth article are clauses about allowing one member of the board of directors, limiting the personal liability of directors, allowing shareholders to act by written consent rather than at a meeting, and various other things. Again, I would suggest you speak with an attorney about some of the clauses you might want to include in this sixth article of your Articles of Organization. The seventh article allows you to set the effective date that the corporation is formed to a later date than the date that the Articles of Organization is filed with the Massachusetts Division of Corporations. Typically, a corporation is formed on the date that the Articles of Organization are filed and received by the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The seventh article allows you to set a later effective date, which can't be later than 90 days after the date the Articles of Organization are filed. Usually, the reason why you want to do this is if there's some specific reason why you want to delay the start of your corporation. For example, if it's near the end of a calendar year, but you don't want to start the corporation until the new year, you'd often file the Articles of Organization in November or December, but have the effective date of the corporation be January 1st of the new year. In the eighth articles of the Articles of Organization, you will add the information about the registered agent, the registered office, and the officers and directors of the corporation from the second and third steps. You also need to add information about the fiscal year end of the corporation, a description of what the IT corporation does, and the principal address of the corporation, and the address where the corporation's records will be stored. As I mentioned earlier, the information in this eighth article can be amended at any time without amending the Articles of Organization, although you may need to pay an additional filing fee with the Massachusetts Division of Corporations, depending on how you make the change. After you completed all these articles, you will need to sign and file the Articles of Organization with the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The person who signs the articles and files them is known as the incorporator, which is just a fancy name for the person who signs, dates, and files the Articles of Organization. If you have an attorney setting up the corporation for you, your attorney will often sign it as the incorporator. But if you or one of the other shareholders is setting it up yourself, that person will need to sign and file the articles and pay the filing fees that I discussed earlier. On the fourth page, you'll also need to provide the name of the person who filed it and their contact information in case anyone from the Secretary's office has any questions. Step 5, the organizational meeting. After the Articles of Organization are filed, the next step is for the directors to hold an organizational meeting and take the other steps that are needed for your IT consulting corporation to become an operating entity that is in compliance with the law. Now, although I'm calling it a meeting, it doesn't actually have to be a meeting. Under the Massachusetts Corporation Statute, the directors can act by unanimous written consent rather than holding a meeting. However, either way, several actions need to be taken and voted on by the directors, and these votes need to be documented in writing, either in the form of written consent or by someone taking the minutes of the meeting. These minutes or consent need to be stored with the permanent records of the corporation, usually in the form of a minute book, which can be kept physically or electronically. Typically, at the organizational meeting, there are several corporate actions that are voted on and approved by the board of directors. Here are some of the key ones. First, the directors need to vote on and adopt the bylaws of the corporation. Every Massachusetts corporation is required to have bylaws, and the bylaws serve as the operating handbook for your corporation. Bylaws will include information about shareholder and director meetings, the duties of officers and directors, the appointment and removal of officers and directors, indemnification procedures, shares and shareholder certificates, and various other information. It's an essential document for your IT consulting corporation, and you want to make sure to have one in order to be in compliance with all required rules for Massachusetts corporations. Otherwise, you run the risk of having the corporate veil pierced and having your personal assets be at risk by the activities of your corporation. The bylaws should be drafted before the organizational meeting, and you should probably have an attorney help you with this. If you use bylaws that you found on the internet, make sure to have a Massachusetts attorney review them to make sure that you and your IT corporation are adequately protected. Second, the directors need to authorize the corporation to obtain an EIN, which is a federal employer identification number. This can be obtained online from the IRS. I'll put a link below to the appropriate website. The EIN is an essential number for your corporation, and you'll need it to obtain a bank account, pay taxes, hire employees, and take other official actions with the state and federal governments. As I mentioned, you can obtain it for free from the IRS in a matter of moments using the website that I provided a link to below. So don't use any other website to get your EIN. Third, the directors need to approve and adopt a form stock certificate for the corporation shares or approve the use of uncertificated shares. Either one is fine. You just need to have an official record of how the corporation is going to handle its shares. And if the corporation has multiple classes of shares, The directors will need to take a vote about each class and how each class is going to be handled. If there are multiple classes of shares and stock certificates, any stock certificate will need to summarize the rights of the particular class of share that it applies to and what the rights are. So for example, if a certificate is for non-voting shares, this will need to be stated on the stock certificate, usually on the back. Another thing to note is that if you place restrictions on the shares in the articles of organization, you also need a legend on the back of any stock certificate that says that the shares have restrictions that are contained in the articles of organization. Related to this, the directors also need to vote to authorize the issuance of shares to the founding shareholders and how much consideration the shareholders need to pay for their shares. By consideration, I mean the amount of money or services that each individual will pay or contribute for the shares. Often the cash consideration is nominal, but it often depends on your circumstances, who the founders are, how much each is investing in the company, and whether they are also working for your IT consulting corporation. The actual number of shares that are issued can vary wildly, depending on how many shareholders you have. There's no need to use all 275,000 shares that have been authorized. You should only use a small portion of that number, which will leave your corporation with an unused bank of authorized shares that can be issued in the future if needed. In connection with the issuance of shares, the directors may also want to consider adopting a stockholder agreement or a share purchase agreement with vesting provisions that has to be signed by each and every shareholder before they receive the shares. Speak with an attorney if you have any questions about these. And as a warning, be very careful about allowing shareholders to pay with sweat equity in connection with your IT consulting corporation. If that's the only payment they're receiving from your corporation, you run the risk of violating the Massachusetts Wage Act, which can trigger 3 times what's owed to the individual plus attorney's fees. Additionally, the directors also need to vote to authorize the corporation to set up a business bank account or multiple business bank accounts and direct the appropriate officers to take all needed steps to set up the business bank account. This director authorization usually needs to be done before you set up a bank account because many banks will ask for the corporate authorization, which means the approval from the director. When you take the vote, you don't need to have a particular bank already picked out. It can just be a generic vote that authorizes the corporation to set up a bank account with a financial institution. There's no need to limit or restrict your bank options at this point in time. There are lots of other acts that can be authorized by the directors at this initial organizational meeting. However, the most important thing to remember is that no matter what actions are authorized, you need to document all of them, either by taking minutes at the meeting or by unanimous written consent. Either way, the written documentation should be stored with the permanent corporate records for your IT consulting corporation. This isn't just busy work, it's the legal proof that your corporation is operating as a real separate entity, which helps shield your personal assets. Now, if you're the only owner of your IT consulting corporation, you might be thinking that all of this is unnecessary and a big pain in the neck because you are holding every single position as officer and director and are the only shareholder. And I totally agree with you that it's a big pain in the neck. But as a corporation, you need to take these steps in order to set up your corporation properly. Some of the steps will be unnecessary, like a shareholder agreement or maybe restrictions on the shares, but all the others are critical if you want the corporation to actually be a real entity that shields your personal assets and prevents the corporate veil from being pierced. Step 6, following up on the organizational meeting. The next step to take in setting up your IT consulting corporation is for the officers to follow through on the actions that were approved by the directors in the organizational meeting and any other necessary actions. So that means the officers will need to obtain the EIN for the corporation, open the corporate bank accounts, sign the stock certificates, collect the consideration from the shareholders, and take whatever other action was approved by the directors. Here are a couple key acts by the officers that need to be done that I haven't discussed previously. First, you'll need to register your new IT consulting corporation with the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, the DOR, through Mass Tax Connect. This is for handling state taxes such as the corporate excise tax. Massachusetts corporations are subject to a corporate excise tax, and there is a minimum excise tax that needs to be paid by the corporation every single year. Check DOR guidance for registration and filing requirements. And if your IT consulting business will also sell pre-written software or have employees, you'll also need to register for sales tax and employer withholding tax. I'll drop a link below to the Massachusetts DOR website where you can find out more information about how to register your corporation and whatever other information you might need. Second, if you want your new corporation to be taxed as an S corporation, which is a small business corporation, you must file Form 2553 on time, generally within 2 months and 15 days of being formed, for the election to take place for the current year. I'll drop a link below for the information about how to file Form 2553 with the IRS and obtain it in About S Corporations. As you may know, the default taxation for a corporation is as a C corporation, which means that the corporation is taxed at 2 levels, the corporate level and the shareholder level. An S corporation is taxed as a pass-through entity, which means there's only one level of taxation at the shareholder level, and many IT consulting companies prefer pass-through taxation. So if you want to be taxed as an S corporation, you need to file Form 2553 within that 75-day window of the corporation being formed. If you missed a deadline, relief is possible, but it just requires extra steps. Speak with your accountant if you have any questions about filing your S corporation tax election and whether you want to be an S corporation or a C corporation. Third, your IT consulting corporation will also need to register with the Department of Unemployment Assistance, which is called the DUA. Even if your corporation only has one employee and it's you, the corporation still needs to register with the DUA. I'll put a link below to the website where you can register with the DUA. There are lots of other acts that can be taken depending on what the directors approved at the organizational meeting. However, after the officers follow through on these acts, your IT consulting corporation is officially set up and ready to operate. Congratulations! But in order to properly maintain your corporation and protect your business and personal assets, there are two more steps that you want to take. Step 7, comply with ongoing corporate requirements. The next step to take in order to maintain your IT corporation and protect your other personal assets is to comply with all ongoing corporate formal requirements. Corporations have a lot of rules that need to be followed, and you should do your best to follow all of them. After forming your IT consulting corporation, keep these compliance items on a recurring calendar so you get reminded each and every year. First, file your corporation annual report with the Massachusetts Division of Corporation each and every single year. Every corporation must file their annual report within the first 2.5 months after the close of each fiscal year. Second, hold annual shareholder and director meetings each and every single calendar year and keep minutes or written consents of each and every single meeting. These meetings should be held at the beginning of every calendar year, and at the shareholder meeting, the shareholder should elect the directors for the year, and at the director meeting, the director should elect the officers for the year. These minutes or consents should go into the corporate minute book and be kept with the corporation's permanent records. Third, and this should go without saying, timely file your taxes with the IRS and the DOR, including your corporate excise taxes. The IRS and the DOR are two divisions of the government you really don't want to mess with. Fourth, keep minutes or written consents and records of all important decisions and actions that impacted the corporation and store them in a minute book so that they're part of the permanent records of the corporation. Now, whether these are director minutes or shareholder minutes really depends on the type of action that's being undertaken. Nearly all actions have to be approved by the directors, so no matter what, you should definitely have director consent or director minutes in connection with any kind of major action. However, some actions also need to be approved by your shareholders, and a lot of this depends on what's included in your articles of organization, what's included in your bylaws, or possibly what's included in a shareholder agreement. So depending on what those documents say, you may also need to have certain actions approved by the shareholders in addition to the directors. One key thing to note is that if you fail to file your annual reports for a period of time, such as usually 2 to 3 years, the corporation will be administratively dissolved by the Massachusetts Division of Corporations and the Secretary of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This will mean your corporation no longer exists, and so your personal assets will no longer be shielded from your business debts and liability. So make sure to put reminders on your calendars to file your annual reports and take all these other actions. Step 8, practical legal and business tips for IT corporations. The next step to take to protect your business and other personal assets is to proactively institute good and strong risk management practices and procedures. At a bare minimum, as an IT corporation, you should have strong contracts that limit your liability, clearly define the scope of work you're performing, contain straightforward payment provisions, and have clear dispute resolution procedures. You should also have professional liability insurance and any other type of insurance your business might need, and you also want to institute and follow strong data protection and security requirements in order to protect your confidential information and your client's confidential and proprietary information. These are business essentials that go beyond forming your corporation properly and will protect your business and other personal assets. Consult with qualified professionals in each of these areas to help you out. If you found this information helpful, please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. We post new content all the time and provide legal tips that help protect and grow your business. Let's quickly recap. We walk through 8 key steps to take and protect your IT consulting corporation. Choosing and securing a great name, appointing a registered agent in a registered office, appointing initial officers and directors, drafting and filing your articles of organization with Massachusetts, holding an organizational meeting that approves various actions, following through on the approved actions, complying with ongoing corporate requirements, and finally, taking other practical and important risk management steps to protect your business. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer each and every single one. I'll see you in the next video.